We are live. I can see we're live there on the screen. Everybody settle down. Charlie Marlow, that's the great Eric Messersmith. And look, we're back to politics. We were politics, then we're doing sports. Now we're politics. Eric, I realized that I don't really care about sports that much besides Ohio State football. So I'm thinking to myself, how do we do a sports podcast? And I'm like, I don't have anything to talk about for the next 6 months, really, till about September, till football season starts. And then I'm like, even though I didn't want to talk about politics anymore because I was tired of it, because we did a show every week for the entirety of 2024, Eric Messersmith, you can't avoid politics. It's in your face every freaking day. So we might as well just embrace it and continue to talk politics, which you like doing anyway. So it's all good.
Yeah, look, unless you wanted to break down the NBA playoffs, like do previews for the next 2 months and then maybe talk NFL free agency, that's what I could give you, but I don't know how many people would really care about that. I don't know if you would care about that. And with politics,
No.
It used to be you had to follow politics closely to really have an opinion. That has changed. With the proliferation of YouTube and the media outlets, and of course Donald Trump, to his credit, I think, and detriment, being everywhere all the time, everything everywhere all at once, like that movie. I think it's inescapable. And the other thing too is the line has blurred between sports and politics so much. Stephen A. Smith is openly talking about running for president in 2028, doing political talk while he is also still continuing to do all of his NBA stuff, his daily show on ESPN. Like Bob Costas, who is perhaps the most legendary sportscaster maybe ever, certainly the last half century, is doing hardcore political opinions now on Bill Maher. I mean, that the lines have the Colin Kaepernick thing. Do sports teams go to the White House? All of this stuff over the last 5 or 10 years, athletes openly talking about politics. I feel like sports and politics are kind of merging together in a lot of ways. And so, why not do both? We'll do, like you said, we'll focus on politics, but we also can talk about sports when interesting or important things come up. And then when we get to NFL season, we can shift the focus back to what we both love, football, but still we could talk about politics when those kind of things come up as well. I feel like the audiences, there's a lot more overlap than there used to be between those things.
Sure. And before I criticize Donald Trump, I will give him credit, although I don't even know if this is a compliment or not. But whether you like Donald Trump or not, he is liquid gold for the content business, right? You can't avoid Donald Trump. I think a lot of this is by design, right? He's a guy who he made his money marketing, branding, TV. He understands ratings. He understands the news cycle, right? And look, and I always rip on these people. I think there are so many political grifters. The kids would call them glazers. I would call them dick riders, basically. People that are so uncompromisingly partisan, right? Will never say anything bad about their side and just criticize the other side. But then I also think, man, so many people are getting so rich off the content business during the Donald Trump era. And it's not all Donald Trump. It's also, as you said, the proliferation of YouTube and podcasts and independent media, and people can do podcasts from their home. But man, a lot of people are making a lot of money, in my opinion, just dividing the country.
Absolutely. And look, for some of those people, I think they're true believers. I think they're not putting on an act. They really do have this worldview. And I think social media and the algorithms has warped them even more. And a lot of these people are very smart. Like in some ways, there's been a lot of research about this, or some research, and people have pointed this out. In some ways, very smart people are more susceptible to propaganda and to kind of falling into that tribalism than dumb people are, because they can convince themselves in their head that, oh yeah, this is right. But then there are the grifters. And I think I don't want to call anybody out by name, but if you follow prominent people and you see kind of their evolution over time, you can kind of tell who clearly is doing this as a money grab and who the true believers are. And maybe it's a little bit of both for a lot of people, right? Because we're all, we all respond to incentives as human beings. And right now, the incentives are clear in media, especially in political media. It is be divisive, be all-consuming with the content that supports your team, your tribe, and anything they say is good, and anything the other side says is bad. Negative partisanship, they call it, which essentially is negative partisanship is what am I for? Well, it depends. Well, what my opposition on the people I hate are for, because whatever they are for, I'm against. And that is kind of the world we are in right now, where negative partisanship drives everything. So the thing that you and I did in 2024, for the people who are with us, and what we'll try, I'm sure, do again in 2025, is just try to be fair. Like, obviously, we have our points of view. We have our preferences. Anyone who's listened to this show knows that, or will listen to it, will come to learn it. But that doesn't mean you can't say, you should be able to point out things that the side you agree with more does that you hate, or the side you disagree with does that you like. So, for instance, if you are a hardcore Donald Trump person and you can't think of off the top of your head 3 things you don't like or you disagree with about Trump, or same thing if you're a hardcore Democrat and you hate Trump, if you can't think of 3 things you disagree with, say, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden on off the top of your head, then I would argue that you are in too deep. Like, you will just go with anything. And hell, a lot of people probably can't even think of one thing. Like, just give me one thing, if you are a hardcore MAGA person, where you say, you know what, I think Donald Trump is wrong on this issue, or I think the Democrats are right on this issue. If you can't do one thing, then I would just humbly suggest that perhaps you have fallen into this negative partisanship trap that is so easy for us, because it's basically all of our media now on TV, online. And so that is, I think, the test. Like, can you give me one thing where you disagree with your team or tribe on, one thing you're willing to call them out on? And if you can't do that, I mean, look, it's a free country. That's fine. But you have no credibility to me. I don't really care about your opinion that much, because I see that you have been completely captured to the point where you can't even do any kind of free thinking.
Yeah, and I am not a grifter, a glazer, a dick rider, okay? I'm not one of those people, and I'm going to prove it, because I'm going to rip on the Democrats, because I thought they embarrassed themselves at the congressional address. However, we are working backwards. So before I rip on the Democrats for that, because there's news of the day, can we also just agree that Donald Trump is 100% winging it with these tariffs, right? He's just throwing shit on the wall. He's just saying stuff. You know, I saw a tweet and it was like, Monday, tariffs. Tuesday, roll back tariffs. Wednesday, reinstate tariffs. Thursday,
Yes.
rolling back. Friday, tariffs. Golf Saturday, golf Sunday, back to tariffs Monday. Come on. And by the way, if at the end of this, there's billions of dollars of new investment in the United States because these companies move their plants and their factories here, I will give Donald Trump credit. I will, 100%. But as I follow the news cycle, and I don't follow it as closely as you do, it sure as hell seems like he's just throwing shit out there and seeing what sticks. And he says something one day, and then he takes it back the next day with the tariffs.
Trump and tariffs are a great example of what I was talking about a few minutes ago. These people that defend Trump, when he's ready to implement the tariffs, when they actually do go into effect for like a day, like they did this week, this is wonderful. This will bring American manufacturing back. We can get rid of the income tax. We can fund our government through tariffs, which is insanity if you look into that at all. But they're supportive of. They're all on board. And then when Mexico or Canada makes some relatively minor concession, or in this case, like he just froze them today for another month with Mexico, no concession at all. Now all of a sudden it's, well, he didn't really mean it. He's just a master negotiator. He's just threatening the tariffs in order to get these incredible concessions to benefit America. Like, it's got to be one or the other. Either the tariffs are wonderful and they need to go into effect and we have to have them, because we need to bring back American industry, because these other countries are ripping us off, because whatever the rationale may be, all this money that's going to flow into the treasury, or they're a negotiating tactic that gets you concession. They can't be both. They either go into effect and give you these wonderful benefits, which, by the way, are not wonderful, and we have tried these tariff regimes over and over and over again in American history. Go back and look at the Smoot Hawley tariffs in the 1930s and how they exacerbated the economic calamity of the Great Depression, not just in America, but worldwide. By and large, wide scale, massive tariffs are a terrible idea for America. But if you believe, like I think Trump does, that they're a good idea, then implement them and defend them, right? If they are so wonderful, if they are going to bring America all this prosperity, then actually have the balls to follow through with it. And I think it's interesting. We still don't know if Trump really believes it. He talks the talk of believing it. He flirts with it. He has implemented them on a small degree so far. He says reciprocal tariffs are coming across the board in April, but we haven't actually seen them. And one of the reasons we haven't seen them is because look at what has happened to the reaction. Look what happened to the market this week. As we're recording this, the market's having another really tough day. You had 2 really bad days this week. The market has now erased all of the gains since election day, which was supposedly the quote unquote Trump bump because everyone was so excited about what the economy was going to do. That's all gone now. All of that. And tens of millions of Americans are invested in the stock market. It isn't just the very wealthy that this hurts. So I think that is something that's very important to keep in mind when we talk about this tariffs is Trump is clearly reacting to something because he's threatening these things. And now this is the second time we've seen this 1 month pause. At least so far, it's happened with Mexico. As of the time we're recording this, he hasn't yet paused with Canada, but I think that's probably coming. And so that just shows you the markets. Also, a lot of businesses are speaking out against this. The big 3 auto companies have said this is an awful idea because one of the things that we did, and this is another thing that blows my mind, literally we had a thing called NAFTA, right? NAFTA was very controversial. It did lead to a lot of manufacturing leaving America and going to Mexico. It also led to a lot of economic development between Canada and Mexico and America. Trump renegotiated it in 2020. He did it. The Congress approved it. Canada and Mexico agreed. We had a deal, as Trump said. He loves to do deals, right? I love a deal. Now he comes back in office and he's like, you know what? Screw that deal. We're doing 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. I don't care about the deal that I literally just negotiated a few years ago. I mean, that is crazy. And so I just think it shows you kind of the whiplash. Tariffs are a terrible idea. But if you're going to do them and you think they're so great, then do them, because what might even be worse is this back and forth where businesses, consumers have no idea what you're going to do. The markets go up and down. The job report is going to come out tomorrow for February. Jobs numbers don't look great. We had a high number of people filing for unemployment last week, the highest we've had in several years. The Atlanta Fed is predicting we might have negative economic growth in the first quarter of this year. Things are tenuous economically, and introducing this kind of grenade of uncertainty on tariffs and then go with this whiplash of back and forth, it's really bad policy, but I think it's also it's bad politics for Trump. It really is. And one more thing, I know I went on a rant here. This is, I love this quote. This is a guy from JP Morgan. Named David Kelly. He said, quote, "The trouble with tariffs, to be succinct, is that they raise prices, slow economic growth, cut profits, increase unemployment, worsen inequality, diminish productivity, and increase global tension. Other than that, they're fine."
Pretty good. I like that. And as we're recording here, it's 12:37 Central Time. It's 10:37 on the West Coast where Eric lives. But I'm looking at the stock market today, and I'll refresh right now so I have up to the second numbers. So the Dow is down a 1.25. The NASDAQ down 2.5. S&P 500 down basically 2 points. And I do think Donald Trump
2%. You mean 2% or 2 points?
2%. Yeah.
2%.
Sorry, 2%.
Which is a pretty big
I was
drop.
doing percentage. That's what I'm saying. Yes. Dow Jones down 1.25%. NASDAQ down about 2.5%. And the S&P 500 is down about 2%. Yes, those are big drops for all those. And typically, I still think Donald Trump is very reactionary to the stock market. I think that's one thing that he really obviously monitors. And I do think if he has a bad couple days, you do come out there with a big PR splash. Oh, we're reversing the tariffs and all that. But as we kind of rewind back, and I do want to talk a lot about this congressional address, I was pretty I was pretty surprised. I don't remember the exact wording of it, Eric. Maybe you do. But whatever Donald Trump said about, hey, there's going to be tough times or we're going to have to deal with some financial stress, right? He was talking about the tariffs and he basically openly admitted that, hey, we're going to have to go through some rough times before we see the good in this. And I was like, to me, Trump, and look, they're always going to blame the Biden administration. They're going to say we inherited a mess. I get that. It's a lot more nuanced, right? And that's also politics. But I was kind of surprised that Donald Trump openly admitted to saying, hey, we're going to go through some tough times, probably with the stock market, to see the good on the other side of the tariffs. I also find it funny because I do think so many people get their marching orders from Donald Trump because right after he said that, I saw a lot of comments on social media like, well, yeah, we have to go through this if we really want to change things once and for all. Right. And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? Were you surprised that he came out and said that? I don't remember the exact words, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, that was not. Yeah, that was not his campaign message. By the way, the campaign message wasn't wasn't we're going to have some pain. The campaign message was I'm going to decrease prices on day one, which was always crazy. Prices are not going to go down unless we have a major recession, which is on the table. In which case, we'll all be very unhappy. Prices are going down because the economy will be in the gutter, basically, if that were to happen. If we were to have actual deflation. And so far, prices are still, it's been 1 month. Nobody's blaming Trump or giving him much credit right now for anything because it's also brand new. But the early indicators on inflation are it's, probably going to stay pretty steady for the rest of this year and not have any dramatic drop. Yeah, look, the theory, if you're trying to be generous, if you're saying, okay, what is the theory that the people who are pushing Trump on this, who are actually genuinely believe this, it's a minority of economists. Let's be clear. Most economists believe that massive across the board tariffs are a terrible idea. But there are a minority, and many of them are in the Trump orbit. And I think Trump himself believes this as well, that the short-term price you will pay, meaning higher prices, because that's what's going to happen. It's going to happen right away on things like food. We get a lot of our food supply from Mexico. Those are going to go up right away. Cars, they're estimating they could go up $20,000 for some cars if these tariffs actually go into effect, which they haven't yet. The theory is, okay, you will pay more in the short term. Other countries will retaliate. And so our companies who make a ton of money exporting everything in America all over the world, they're going to lose out and they're going to lose jobs. But in the long term, companies will start producing things in America. They'll onshore things. We're going to start building manufacturing plants all over the country. In order for that to happen, it would take years and years of the quote unquote pain. And I don't know if we'd ever get there because we have developed the global economy over the years, which has had a huge net benefit for America. Yes, we have lost some manufacturing. It has been devastating for certain people's lives, and we should acknowledge that. For certain communities, particularly areas like where you and I grew up in the Midwest, that has been a downside of globalization and free trade, which were coming anyway. But there's been tremendous upside. I mean, we have the highest standard of living that anyone's ever had in the United States, Mary. We've come out great. And other countries have done pretty well too, and global poverty rates are way lower than they used to be. But the theory is that this will somehow produce this kind of onshoring. But I do think it's interesting that at least he did acknowledge, yes, there will be pain in the short term when this goes into effect, because politically, that it's going to happen. So you might as well try to get out in front of it and try to brace people for it, because it's coming anyway, and we're seeing it already. When again, they aren't even in effect yet for the most part. He keeps delay. He did put the tariffs in effect on China of 10%, and then I think an additional 10% this week. That he did a steel and aluminum tariff, but by and large, this hasn't even come yet. It's still something that's on the horizon that keeps getting pushed back, and you see the market's reaction to it, and it is not a good one. And I just want to say one thing, by the way. That doesn't mean that Trump is completely wrong about everything when it comes to tariffs. Like,
right.
he, I think to his credit, said China in particular in his first term is ripping us off. And he put tariffs on China. And those tariffs weren't great for American exporters, but the Biden administration kept a lot of those tariffs in place and actually increased some of them. And that makes sense if you're targeting against one country that is clearly cheating the system by stealing intellectual property, by devaluing its currency, by flooding markets. If you're competing against China and you're saying, hey, you're not competing fairly, we're going to tariff you in these industries, or like the Biden administration did, which was really smart, is they put up, I think it was a 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from China. That's really smart because China is doing a great job at making cheap electric cars, and we are trying to get our electric car industry off the ground. All these automakers other than Tesla that are kind of late to the game. And so you're trying to build an industry of the future. Solar panels is another example. That makes sense. So it's not that tariffs are always a bad idea in every case. It's that when you do it across the board on everything, it can lead to really, really bad results.
All right, so getting back to the speech here, and I kind of caught it late, so I started watching it on TV after I'd seen some tweets about it, some X posts, whatever we're calling it these days. So I started watching live, and I'm like, well, I don't want to just start 30, 40 minutes in. So I went to YouTube to basically start from the beginning. I think I watched a good hour, then I fell asleep, and the reason I watched is I started to see everybody ripping on the Democrats because of their signs, right? And then you had Al Green standing up with his cane, and he gets booted out there. And because I try to be fair, sometimes you can just look at it like who embarrassed themselves more, right? And I think for this speech, I think it was clearly the Democrats, right? I think Donald Trump's speech, it wasn't unifying by any means, but he hit the topics that he's good at. And again, when we talk about Donald Trump, he understands the spectacle of it all and the news cycle and storylines, right? With Laken Riley's family and the kid. And you also had, what was it? The soldier or the Secret Service guy. But the other one I was laughing was it's not funny, but it is. But he had the girl who was there basically because she had a volleyball spiked in her face by a trans athlete. And I just, again, it's not funny, but it is, because the first thing I thought of was Meet the Parents, right? When they're playing volleyball. And
Yes.
Greg,
In the water,
the character
right?
played by, Ben Stiller, he won't spike the ball. And they're like, and then he finally does. He reaches up and he just destroys the ball, and it goes right off that woman's face. And I think it was her wedding weekend, right? I think it ruined her nose or whatever.
Yes.
So anyway,
and they're like, "Come
that's
on,
not funny."
Falker.
Right. No, it is funny, but it's just Donald Trump does a good job of kind of hitting on storylines, knowing what's going to play on social media. All of that stuff plays really well on social media. And then also, I just thought the Democrats did look silly. I thought they looked stupid. And I know in the past, look, you had Nancy Pelosi, she ripped up the speech. You had whoever the hell called Obama a liar years ago. You always have Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene chirping. They're always embarrassing themselves too, right, when it's the other side during Biden. But I just thought collectively for the Democrats, I thought the little hand paddles like they were at a live auction, I thought those were stupid. I thought, again, the old guy, Al Green, however old he is, he's got to be 80, right? It's just the Democrats, they need new leadership. They need fresh, younger, Midwestern, to get these swing states. And I feel like when the leaders of your party are Chuck Schumer's got to be 80, whatever. Nancy Pelosi's 80, whatever she is. This Al Green,
She's
who
80,
I had heard of, but
I think.
now he's right. He's standing up like with his cane. He looks like Mr. Burns, whatever it is. I just thought it was a terrible look. And I think the Democrats embarrassed themselves at the congressional address. And right there, Eric, that's why I'm not a grifter and a glazer, because I can admit that.
Yes, or what did you say earlier? A dick rider, which I had not heard that
dick
one
rider,
before.
Yes. I like that the best.
I've heard it in a different context, but I think that
it's that context, it's that analogy.
Right. I think we get it. The thing, I agree with you. I want to I just kind of ripped Trump on the tariffs. Let me start by praising Trump, and then I'm going to rip the Democrats. So what do I like about Trump? If you said, okay, give me the positives of these first 6 or 7 weeks. Let's start with this. He is available and accessible all the time.
Yes.
Basically every day, taking questions. And yes, some of those questions are from weird right-wing websites that they've let into the press room, but not all of them. Some of them are from ABC and CNN, and he's taking the questions. He's giving you access. He's letting you into the cabinet room for 2 hours. He's having a weird Oval Office thing where Elon Musk has one of his 15 kids on his shoulders running around picking his nose. He's letting you in where he and Vance are berating Zelensky in the Oval Office. He's letting you in with Macron where they're sitting there for 50 minutes and Macron is like gently correcting him when Trump says something that is false. Give Trump credit for this access. Like, this is great that we are in the White House every day hearing from the president, even if some of the stuff he says is untrue or, conspiracy theories. Put that aside. He's giving you the access. And also, as you said, Trump's great strength is what it's always been throughout his whole life: public relations, self-promotion, marketing. And the State of the Union, you saw that to a T. They hit all the buttons, the emotion. Laken Riley, her family, the college student who was killed by an illegal immigrant last year. You had that 13-year-old cancer survivor who was deputized as a Secret Service agent, hitting the right notes with the style, right? The substance is a different story. We can talk about that in a minute. But the style, the presentation. Then you had the Democrats. What did they do? Okay, you're the minority party during one of these events. We've all seen these congressional addresses, State of the Unions. You can't really do much, right? You're not talking. The president is talking, right? But what did the Democrats do? Al Green, who was censured today, rightfully so by the House, embarrasses himself, standing up and screaming like a child, had to be removed from the House. Then, as I mentioned, that 13-year-old boy, this was the biggest example, but there were others. They didn't, by and large, stand to cheer that 13-year-old boy. That is just shameful, but it's also incredibly stupid politics.
Yeah.
Just because you hate Donald Trump or you disagree with his policies, you think he shouldn't be the president, whatever. He's talking about a 13-year-old boy who survived brain cancer, had 5 months to live and is still living. God bless him. And you can't get off your ass to clap for that? That makes you look so petty. It goes back to what we were saying before. It makes you look like you are so tribalistic, so filled with hate for Trump that you can't stand up and just show some human decency. That was shameful for the Democrats. And then there was something that was a lot less shameful, but was equally stupid or somewhat stupid, which was the signs. Like the little signs that said liar or whatever they said. The only one I liked was the congresswoman from New Mexico. Musk steals. The only one I liked was the congresswoman, I think from New Mexico, who when Trump walked in, she stood in the aisle behind him with a sign that said, "This is not normal." And then a Republican congressman ripped that out of her hands. That's the one I liked. The rest of them, again, it makes you look like children. It makes you look, it diminishes your stature. You are the opposition party, okay, in the greatest democracy known to human history. Stand up and act like it. You have some dignity and decorum. You don't have to like him. You don't have to cheer for the weird things he says, the lies he tells, the policies you don't like. Fine. But the Democrats did not do well there. And I think it goes to a larger point. Their base is so angry and so mad about Trump, about the actions he's taken. And they are putting so much pressure on these Democrats to quote unquote do something. You know when you had a chance to do something? Last November. And you didn't do it. And some of you didn't do it because Kamala Harris wasn't pure enough on the Israel issue or whatever issue you may like. Right? And so that you had a chance to do something, you didn't do it. And you'll have a chance again in 2026 and 2028 at the ballot box. Until then, you know what you do is you shut up. You shut the fuck up. And James Carville was so right on this because Donald Trump is still the same guy. He is in some ways a little better. He's learned some lessons. He's got some smarter people around him now. They're much more focused than they were in the first term. It's still chaotic, but it's less chaotic. But he's still the same guy. The style of his speech was pretty good. The substance, I mean, I have never heard a president give an address to Congress that was that nasty, that partisan, that filled with dishonesty. If you read the fact check, it's as long as, a city block. He's the same guy. Many of his policies are unpopular. We talked about what's happening in the stock market. We talked about these tariffs. You talk about the budget that may cut Medicaid by potentially tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. Tax cuts that mainly benefit the rich. These things are not popular. And on the same day he gave that State of the Union where Democrats embarrassed themselves, his net approval rating on 538, which sadly is now defunct because ABC shut it down, went net negative for the first time. He had a net negative approval rating from the time he was inaugurated up until Monday. And it's dipped net negative. It's essentially even now. He's essentially at 49, 49. His approval rating has slid. History shows us that in almost every presidential administration, your approval rating declines as the first year goes on, in some cases dramatically, because of course it does. You start doing things that are unpopular and the other side gets organized. You look at these town halls around the country where Democrats are showing up and shouting at these Republican members of Congress, sometimes in deep red districts. There are protests organically springing up all over the country. And sure, some of them are funded by outside groups. We get it, but that's always going to be there. The point is, he is less popular than he was on Election Day when he wasn't very popular to begin with. You just have to not embarrass yourself as the Democrats. Push back on the policies you disagree with. Fight in the courts as they are doing. Fight in Congress when you can, but don't take the bait of going over the top. And so now the focus of that State of the Union wasn't on some of the nasty stuff Trump said about Biden and the way he was so political and divisive. It wasn't on the numerous, let's say, misstatements he had during the presentation. It wasn't on some of his unpopular policies. It was on Al Green and his cane, on the Democrats and their weird signs, not standing to applaud a 13-year-old boy. It's hard because these politicians are incredibly ambitious people. They are almost by definition incredibly partisan people. That's why they're there, right? Because they really care about these things to an extreme degree. And the base, the people that really support them, are just as fervent as they are. And so the incentive is to quote unquote do something. But do something is not a strategy. Do something for what end? To what end? Like, we can do all kinds of things. That doesn't mean they're good or productive. And what the Democrats did that night, in the long run, is probably not going to matter. But the news cycle moves so fast, and so many other things are going to happen, that the Democrats are going to benefit just from being the opposition. But it makes you look back. Remember 2009? We have had close elections, very close elections historically, since 2000 in every election except for one, 2008. That was the only blowout we've seen in the last quarter century. You had a Republican president, George W. Bush, whose numbers were in the tank. Obama cruises to re-election. Huge majorities in the House. He had 60 votes in the Senate. It was a landslide election for Obama. The Republican Party, their reputation was in the toilet. And what happened? Within a year, Obama's approval rating sank. The Tea Party was formed. The Democrats lost a Senate election in Massachusetts after Ted Kennedy died. And then the next year, Republicans won a landslide in Congress and took back the House. It changes fast. And if you're the Democrats, the train is coming down the track most likely for you, right? Don't derail it by doing stupid shit.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the meeting with Zelensky, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance last week. Before, I do want to mention this, though, because I do criticize Donald Trump a lot. I do think one policy which is overwhelmingly popular, and I have this little graph here, if you can see it, and it says historical illegal crossings along the U.S. southern border since 2000. And if you see how high that gets, that's 2024 under Biden. And then it literally drops off the table. And I also thought one of Trump's best lines, and by the way, I did fall asleep. I'm not blaming that on Trump. It was a long speech, but I was tired. I probably watched the first hour, but when I'm just thinking back, I think one of his best lines was something about the border, and he goes, "Well, it goes to show that we just needed a new president, right? Whatever that line was, we just needed a new president or a different president." I thought that was a very good line there, and I think most people, I grew up a Democrat. I think most people are are with Donald Trump at least in some way on the border. Probably not your hardcore progressives and all that, but I think a lot of reasonable people in the middle who are even Democrats are like, yeah, this border is getting out of hand. Like, let's do something about it. And Donald Trump has done something about it. And this is without any legislation. So it surely proves that Biden and Kamala Harris, by rolling back all of those executive orders in the Remain in Mexico, they could have done this as well. Now, don't get me wrong. I also think they should have passed the bill that would have changed the asylum laws, but Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, this is on them. They could have cleaned up the border. That was their worst issue, arguably. Also, with Joe Biden just being so incredibly old before he had to move on. But okay, so the Zelensky meeting with Vance and Trump. This also gets to the nuance of this. I think it's okay to say, look, the Ukraine, they're in a bad spot right now. This is essentially, whatever you want to call it, trench warfare, and the lines haven't really moved in a couple years. And where are we going with this? Is there any way that Ukraine can actually win this war? And to me, if a win is getting back all the territory, I don't think that's going to happen. And look, Vladimir Putin also doesn't value the lives of his soldiers. So if he's going to lose 750K to 1 million plus soldiers, whatever it ends up being, for smallish parcels of land, I don't know how Ukraine combats that. So that's just me being honest. However, I also don't think it helps to just degrade Zelensky, right? And maybe that wasn't by design all the way, but if you're really watching that exchange, I mean, the first thing Trump says when he walks up is, "Oh, you dressed up." Right? Oh, nice to see you dressed up. He's obviously wearing military fatigues or whatever. There's a whole history of, everybody's seen now the pictures of Winston Churchill during wartime. That is not something that's that out of the ordinary, but that's clearly a right-wing talking point. Like, all the influencers are, why can't you wear a suit and all that? Even the question from the reporter, who apparently is Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend.
Right. How
and
crazy
he asks,
is that?
Right. He asked,
by the way,
can
we just
say
the Associated Press is not allowed part of the pool anymore into the Oval Office. But this hack, right-wing hack who's banging Marjorie Taylor Greene, can ask Zelensky a question about his suit. By the way, Zelensky with a great comeback when he asked him. Zelensky was like, "I'll tell you what, when I'm not at war anymore, I'll come and wear a suit and maybe it'll be better than yours."
Right.
I was like,
and so I also thought that exchange said a lot if you watch the wide shot. And this is, there's a lot of things JD Vance does that I am okay with. I'm good with. He's from Ohio. Hey, he's an Ohio State fan, right? He likes Ohio State football, just like me. We're the same. No, but like, when that, I thought this was telling, Eric. When that question was asked, and maybe it was just the angle I saw, but there was a wide-ish shot, and you could see Zelensky, Trump, JD Vance, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who is trying to broker this mineral deal, right? So this hack reporter, he asks, what is a hack gotcha question? And I don't remember if Trump really laughed, but Marco Rubio did not laugh. And whether you like Rubio or not, or you think he is a statesman, right? Like, he didn't laugh. JD Vance, if you watch that, had a big old chuckle. Like, let's just have again, that's childish. That's childish. And I think in a way, Rubio's like, first of all, you are disrespecting this dude, right? And now you're kind of adding to it. You're bullying him. And by the way, just so everybody knows, like, I started this whole rant with saying, I get it. If your take is this war is going nowhere. We got to end it because Ukraine has no chance. I understand that. I totally get that. But to degrade and to go after Zelensky when you would never do that to Putin, you would never do that to Putin. And the language they use versus Zelensky versus Putin, it's so much softer on Putin than it is on Zelensky.
Right.
I don't understand what the right is doing with this. I honestly, Mitch McConnell, who I'm not like a fan of, but he goes, I don't know where this came from. They just started listening to Tucker Carlson. I think there's a lot to that. I understand Russia also, they're not woke, right? There's a lot of identity politics.
Yes.
They're not pro-immigration. They're very white. That's a big part of this. Don't get me wrong. But like the way that we are just kind of at least 50% of the country, and I don't know if it's 50%, but the Republican Party has just saddled up to Putin. And it's just so odd to me.
It's shameful and disgusting. And there's a lot going on here. Let's start here. There's clearly personal animus, particularly between Vance and Zelensky, but also I think between Trump and Zelensky. They don't like each other. And which is kind of crazy for Vance, because here is a man, Zelensky, who's held his country together at war for 3 years and is trying to save his country. But you're right. There's a larger thing here that's going on. Like, for instance, Ukraine is a democratic country, an ally of the United States, being attacked by an authoritarian regime. And it's now gospel on the right that we can't give them any more money to help them. Meanwhile, we give billions of dollars to Israel, the number one recipient of foreign aid, a democracy fighting a less powerful, much less powerful, authoritarian type regime with Hamas. And nobody on the right complains about that. Now, I want to be clear. My position is we should be helping both Israel and Ukraine. But think about that distinction. Why one and not the other? Well, there's several reasons for it, but a lot of it is the tribalism of partisanship now. It is, well, my side doesn't want to fund them. Why do they not want to fund them? Well, the ideological reason is because, as you said, there is a tilt on the right, which Ronald Reagan, would be rolling over in his grave, where the right now, a large chunk of it, sympathizes more with Russia, an authoritarian dictatorial regime where if you disagree with Putin, you're going to the gulag and you might end up dead, than they do with a democracy under attack like Ukraine. Why do they sympathize more with Russia? Well, I think for a lot of them, it's what you said. Culturally, Russia is a conservative government. Putin has gone hardcore against the LGBTQ community. The trans community speaks out against that. They prop up religion, nationalism. For Trump, he's drawn to these strongman figures. He likes those people. He talks more fondly about them often, authoritarian leaders, than he does talk about leaders of fellow democracies. He has a sympathy for them. I think it's pretty clear by now. Like, I'm not saying anything that if you follow Trump should be mind-blowing. And the idea that we should stand up for the values of democracy and freedom, that used to be a universal American thing across the political spectrum. During the Cold War, it really didn't matter much if you had a liberal Democrat in the White House or a conservative Republican for most of the Cold War. The general policy against the Soviet Union was the same. We recognized that we were leading a coalition of Western democracies against an authoritarian regime who had in the Soviet Union had a completely different view of the world, and that we were battling, not thankfully in real life, we were battling through ideas and through proxy wars in different areas around the world. And that was a battle that lasted for a half century, and we won. And we won because our values and ideals were better and we stuck together. But now you have Russia, which is essentially the legacy of what the Soviet Union was, holding on against the West and not getting support like they should from the United States. Now, the Trump people will say, this is, and they've essentially admitted this, that the reason they're being nice to Putin, the reason they say nice things, the reason they're harder on Ukraine, the reason they voted for that disgusting they voted against that resolution from the UN earlier this week that said that the war was started by Russia. They voted with, by the way, Russia and North Korea. If you're ever on the side of North Korea, you're on the wrong side. They basically are saying the reason we're doing this is to get Putin to the table, right? It's the only way we can get him to the table, essentially by using the strategy that other people use on Trump, which is try to kiss up to him. Well, okay, I will say this. If that strategy works and you get a really good peace deal, I will be the first to say it was worth it, even though you damaged the American credibility with our allies and our moral credibility in the meantime. If you get a really good deal that actually protects Ukraine, it's worth it. My thought is Putin doesn't care about that stuff. He's not susceptible to flattery like Trump is. What he wants is a deal that benefits Russia. What does that mean? That means a deal that doesn't guarantee Ukraine's security. That's what Russia wants. They want to control Ukraine as a puppet state. They want to be able to do what they want, like that with Belarus, where you have a pro-Kremlin government. Ukraine and Zelensky, what Zelensky was saying at that Oval Office meeting, if you essentially, and it's kind of hard to hear him sometimes because he has the heavy accent, Trump's talking over him. What he's essentially saying is, where's the security guarantee? None of this matters. Like, Putin didn't care that American businesses were in Ukraine in 2014 when he invaded Crimea or during this war. He didn't care because the Ukraine had no backing, no security guarantee. And so what Zelensky's saying is, you don't want me in NATO, fine, but we have to come up with some framework that will make Putin know that he cannot just wait 6 months or a year or until Trump leaves office and then do this again. And so I think Zelensky was right on the merits of what he said in that White House sit down. But I think maybe politically it wasn't the smartest thing, because that's not how Trump is going to respond to you. And like it or not, Trump is who you're dealing with. So if I were assigning blame, I would put 40% on the blame of Trump, 40% on Vance, and 20% on Zelensky. Because if you notice, it didn't start to go downhill until Vance opened his mouth. Vance is like, can I say something? And that is when you saw things start to turn. And I think Zelensky probably at that point should have just stepped back, even though, again, I agree with what he was saying. The arguments he was making were, I think, the correct arguments. But given that you're in the Oval Office, the cameras are on, you know the world is watching, you know or should know how Trump is, what he responds to, how he's, as Kamala Harris said in the debate, so susceptible to flattery. Like, you know that. You got to know the player, right? And so I think, and Zelensky has tried to, in many ways, kind of walk this back. And there is some reporting now that Rubio and others are going to go to, I think, Saudi Arabia to meet with some Ukrainian officials. That there's some reporting that the mineral deal, Trump mentioned this the other night, that may be back on. So hopefully we can get this rectified, because in my opinion, the only way you're going to get a deal is if you go in where Europe, the United States, and Ukraine are unified, and Putin knows that there's serious pressure on him, that he has to agree to some concessions, and he has to, because he's going to get some of the land, as you pointed out. Everybody knows that. But the key is, what is the security guarantee to keep him from doing this again? And Russia's never going to agree to any kind of security guarantee unless they are forced to. And the only player that has the power to force them is the United States.
Yeah, and that's why you kind of mentioned this, but I think Vance, well, clearly, in my opinion, Vance was worse than Trump in that meeting, because Zelensky, what he was trying to do, in my opinion, is give a history lesson about, well, what does it matter if Putin has had these ceasefires he's agreed to in the past and he's just went right through them and invaded anyway? So he's trying to give, again, in his second language, a history lesson. I don't think J.D. Vance really had a good comeback. So that's where he, to me, kind of went with the childish, oh, have you ever said thank you, right? And then they start arguing. They start yelling. But here's where Zelensky stepped in it. Because if you remember, Trump didn't really get involved until Zelensky said something about, hey, you got these oceans here protecting you, and something along the lines of, it's going to come to you eventually. Now, did I think he was threatening the United States? No, but it kind of sounded like that. And it was bad. Like, that was a bad line from Zelensky. Whether he did it on purpose, whether it was lost in translation, whether he didn't say it the perfect way, that was a bad line to say when you're essentially kind of begging for money in the Oval Office. That that did rightfully so piss off and insult a lot of Americans. And that's when Donald Trump really kind of perked up. And then it was 2-on-1. Then it was Trump and Vance versus Zelensky. Okay. I want to, this is kind of along the same lines, the whole Canada thing. And we started with talking about tariffs, whether the tariffs are going to be on or off with Canada. They were paused for Mexico. We'll see what happens with Canada. But also, I just feel like the disrespect for Canada. And I understand if it's all because it's Trudeau and he's a liberal, right? And you want to just bully the left and all that. But like, this is a country. This is a proud country. And I understand if you think, hey, they need to pay more for NATO because they're protected by us. I get that argument. But when you saw that Four Nations Cup, when a bunch of Canadians, right, the whole crowd basically, they're booing the national anthem. To me, that was them. They're booing Trump and they're booing a bunch of Republican politicians who are having fun and joking with this 51st state, right? With calling Trudeau a governor. And I get it if you don't like Trudeau. I totally understand that. That's politics. Now we go after whether you're left or right in every country. Now it's become that. But I do think this is our strongest ally. We share this border, right? I mean, back and forth, people vacationing in Canada and Canadians going to Florida and whatever it is. I just think that's also so stupid and childish. And it's just unnecessary. Just calling them, come be a state, right? You're a governor. I just feel like the United States should be above that. I understand Trump isn't, and he plays this game. I just think it's so stupid. Some of these things are why I can never get on board with Trump. It's just so childish.
Right. Well, it's not only childish, it's counterproductive and it's incredibly short-sighted. And Trudeau, like him or not, he's not even going to be the prime minister in a few weeks. He's on his way out, and his party is probably going to lose to the Conservatives later this year in an election. But the Conservatives have the same opinion that Trudeau does, which is this is ridiculous. I mean, remember, the only time we talk about NATO and Canada, and yes, they do spend a very low percentage of their GDP on defense. They're one of the freeloaders of NATO, and that is fair to push them to do more. I think they spend about 1.3%, and the goal right now is 2%. They're one of the lowest. But that's not what this is about. I mean, it's not about fentanyl. The percentage of fentanyl that comes across the Canadian border is less than 1%. It's minuscule. To say, well, we want Canada to do more to stop the flow of fentanyl, this is you could, I guess, try to make that argument against Mexico and say, well, we're going to tariff them until they do more. But to say that about Canada, too, this is clearly about what we said earlier, the philosophical belief that we need more tariffs because we need to bring things back to America. And, of course, our economies, as I said before, with the USMCA, the trade agreement, are so integrated. They were talking about cars. Cars in their production go back and forth across the borders a bunch of times for parts. There are industries in Maine and other places where they send products to Canada to finish them, bring them back into the United States. We get electricity in some northern states from Canada. Our economies are so integrated. And what are we doing this for? You are destroying these economic arrangements. You are alienating one of our closest allies. To what end? To get some small gains in certain industries? And it goes to the larger point, and this ties into Ukraine. It ties into everything that we've been talking about. Go back and look, if you're a history person, or even if you're not, Google it or go to ChatGPT and look at what happened in the world in the 100 years prior to World War II. From like the 1850, say 1850 to 1950. The world was a mess. Wars everywhere, all over the world. People grabbing territory, poverty, disease. The world was awful for the most part, culminating in 2 world wars that killed tens of millions of people within a few decades. Now look at the last 75 years, 80 years since 1945. Yes, we've had some wars, but by and large, especially compared to the previous period, relative peace. That's why the Russia-Ukraine thing was such a big deal, because it's such an anomaly that a big, powerful country would try to grab a smaller one right beside it. That used to happen all the time. It doesn't happen anymore. It's not a coincidence. It doesn't happen because of the NATO membership and also because of the world that America helped build, the post-World War II order. It's brought peace and prosperity across the world. And I think that is the fundamental critique I have with the way Trump sees the world, is he believes everything is a zero-sum transactional gain. And that if I destroy a relationship here, if I chip away at that framework, if I help undermine something like NATO and the transatlantic partnership, it's okay as long as we get some small net gain in America. And of course, we are rich, we are powerful. Tariffs, 25% across the board with Canada, that'll hurt us. It will drive up prices. It will hurt some of our exporters, but it will hurt them a lot more. It will cause Canada and Mexico potentially to go into recession because of this move. It will boomerang back on us, but they will feel more pain. And so maybe we get some small net gains out of this. But what are we doing? Why are we undermining the bedrock of what has gotten the world into this much, much, not perfect place, but much, much better place than it had been? To what end are we doing that? And it just, the juice is not worth the squeeze on that. I mean, Canada, remember, the only time that Article 5, which is the NATO article that says that if you attack one, it's an attack on all, right? That is the main thrust of NATO. And that's the main reason we've had peace, is Russia knows if they attack any NATO member, that by treaty, all of the NATO members will come to their defense. The only time that's been invoked was to help America after 9/11. When Canada sent soldiers that died, they lost several hundred soldiers in Afghanistan fighting for us. And now we're gonna shit on them to get what? To get a few more factories built, something that's going to harm everybody's economy but will harm ours less. We're going to piss off one of our dearest allies. It isn't the right thing to do morally, and it doesn't make any sense.
Well said, Eric Messersmith. Let's end on that. Everybody settle down. We're back to politics. We're almost at an hour. Good show. We'll get back to doing this once a week, and also I'll be cutting up some clips on this show as well. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. Eric, have a great weekend, buddy. We'll see you next week.